Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we got a little bit of a different set of content for you. I'm going to talk about 10 things I wish I had learned earlier in my career. Let's go. So first off, just a little bit about what this episode and why. So I'm firmly in the middle of my career, if not sort of in the second half of my career. And I find myself getting asked for advice more and more often. And while I'm always happy to provide perspectives to people who might be earlier on in their career, this has also given me an opportunity to reflect back on my career and think about what are some of the things that I wish I would have known earlier. Now, this advice may not be relevant for everyone, but hopefully there's a few things that you can take away that you do find useful. Alright, so this is not about clickbait. I legit want to try to help people if they're interested. So these are the things I'm going to talk about. If none of these are interesting for you, just give me a like and just, X out the video, and that's cool too. But we're going to talk about joining a community, getting a mentor, building your network, getting exposure, forcing functions, investing, passive income, equity, work-life balance, and most things don't matter. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, let's go. Let's get after it. Okay, number one, join a community. So joining the Microsoft MVP community has been the single most impactful opportunity I've had in my career. I was in the MVP program, I don't even know how many years, probably 12, 13 years-ish, give or take, predominantly in the integration space, a little bit in business applications towards the end, and it truly has been super impactful. And how do I measure impact? I think just in terms of the people I've met, the relationships I've created, how much I've learned. And when you sort of mix those two things together, you're left with opportunities. And I certainly think a lot of the opportunities I've had in my career are a direct relationship to that community. Now, not to say everyone has to be in the MVP community, right? It is a great community, but it's not the be-all, end-all. I think the most important thing is that you find a community that gives you energy. And there's so many out there. And they don't even have to be technically related. I think whether it's a hobby as well, that's totally cool too. I think the big thing is grow your network with like-minded people. And so whether you're interested in the Power Platform, there's many of those groups out there. There's user groups. Now that COVID is starting to slow down a bit, you're starting to see more and more in-person events, but there's tons of online. And then also online forums. It could be tech community. It could be the Power Platform groups, community groups. You're going to find a lot of great people who are interested in helping. I think that's what's pretty cool about these communities is generally the people that are very invested in them are sort of believe in this mindset of sharing is caring. And I think that's kind of the common denominator. And I think it generally leads to good outcomes and good experiences for people. The other thing that does happen as a result of this, and we're going to talk a little bit more when we get to the exposure, but it does provide some public validation for you. And so when you're part of these communities and you're active within them, people will start to look at you as a leader. And as a result, you'll start to establish more and more of that public validation. So that's point number one. Let's jump into point number two. Point number two is get a mentor. And this has kind of come a little bit full circle for me. I do spend some time mentoring other folks, and certainly I'm a big believer in mentorship. I've benefited from it myself, especially earlier on in my career. And it's just a great wealth of knowledge where you generally can kind of shortcut some of the sort of trials and tribulations that a person runs into in their career, and gives you that opportunity to get other people's perspectives. Now, it doesn't mean they're always right, but I think there's always something in there worth listening to, then thinking about it for yourself, and then making a determination. So let's talk a little bit more about what this means. I think ideally an internal mentor is better than an external mentor, but don't sort of say no to an external mentor if you can't get an internal one. And why I say that, I think having context improves the quality of advice. Now, another thing to think about with mentorships is that it can become a highly valuable exchange of information across both parties, and you should try to treat it that way. I think there's always good opportunities for you as the mentee to actually share perspectives that might enlighten your mentor. And so sometimes you hear about this reverse mentorships where you've got executives that want to talk to people earlier on in their career to get their perspectives. And I think that's where kind of the magic happens, is when you find that right mix and the right personalities where you can truly offer them something in return, and naturally you're going to benefit from their advice and their conversations as well. I think the big thing is when you are a mentee, come prepared to those sessions with an agenda and topics that you want to talk to. Don't look at this as it's the mentor's job to do all of that. You come prepared with sort of the areas that you would like to explore. And I think that'll help drive the conversation. Because remember, these people aren't there to tell you what to do. They're there to provide some guidance for you. And naturally, they're going to be busy people. And so in order to respect their time, it's always best to come prepared. Now, if your organization does have a formal mentorship program, go ahead and apply. If not, talk to your leader. Oftentimes, they may know someone who's interested in being a mentor and can help connect you from that perspective. I know earlier on in my career, I won't mention the name of the company, but we had a great mentorship project, or sort of program rather. And what they would always do is make sure that you were assigned a mentor that was outside of your business unit. So I was in IT, and I got matched up with people from engineering, operations, customer service, even the CEO, which was a tremendous honor. And that just gave me perspectives over their world. And certainly as an IT organization, understanding their worlds actually helped us sort of provide a better service itself. So I'm a huge fan of mentorships. You know, not all of them are amazing, but I look at it a little bit like you get out of it what you put into it. But do at least explore it, see what's there, especially early on in your career. It's a way to get better context around the organization and just help you grow. Number 3, build your internal and external network. And so this is important for a few different reasons. And I think generally there's going to come a time when you're looking for a new opportunity, whether you're looking for it or unfortunately maybe you've been caught up with poor economic times and there's layoffs and things of that nature. And I think that's what some people sort of discount earlier on in their career, is how important some of these relationships are as you progress in your career. So as you're building these networks, I think it's important to always be professional, because people will remember this. Now, this doesn't mean you have to like everyone. This doesn't mean you have to agree with what everyone says. But the way in which you conduct yourself is super important. I think it becomes a reflection of who you are. And so down the road, you don't want to run into a situation where someone might ask about you. Hey, person ABC, you worked with them. You worked at the same company back in the day. Were they good? Should we hire them? Those types of things. And being professional, I think, always will help you out in those situations, because you just never know down the road who you're going to run into. And there's a lot of it's a small world, it really is, and you just never know who you're going to run into. So I think being professional, always number one. And so as you are working with people, like I said before, you may have opportunities to work with them again. You may not even know that they're working for the company that you're applying to. And it's just important to be professional. You want to at least be able to say hey, that we didn't see eye to eye all of the time, but they're a consummate professional, and I do think they would be a good hire. And I think another thing just related to that is that there will always be opportunities for people who have proven that they can deliver and are easy to work with. And I don't know how many times in my career have I run into a situation where it's hey, we need a person with these skills. Do you know anybody? And, I'm not going to recommend someone that isn't professional or hasn't done a good job. And those opportunities, I never would have assumed that that takes place as often as it has over the course of my career when I was just starting out. In summary, having a strong track record and creating relationships may help bridge difficult times in the economy. You just never know when these relationships might be worthwhile. And I think this also applies to the external networks as well. So perhaps, you go to these networks, meetings like user groups and sessions like that. Those are other opportunities for networking. And if you act like a jerk in those sessions, in those meetings, Do you think someone's going to be like, oh yeah, you should go talk to that person? I think they'd be a great jerk to join your team, right? So once again, like, you just never know. People are everywhere, and I just find that it's always great to be a professional, and you never know where that could lead you in the future. Getting exposure. And so I think this is super important, and it might feel daunting early on in your career, but it is important to get out of your comfort zone. And what does this mean, getting exposure? Really, it means getting in front of people. And this could be in a variety of different settings. Like, it could be providing a presentation to your department or your business unit. And this is a great way to get exposure. It could be externally. You want to go to a user group and basically put up your hand and provide a presentation. Now, I did say can be a little bit daunting, but the only way it becomes less daunting is through experience. And so this is where user groups or smaller settings are a great way to sort of establish your skill set, establish your presence. And I guarantee you, the more you do this, the more comfortable you will become with it. And so another way to think about this as well is, in terms of getting this exposure, is there's always opportunities in your organization to put up your hand to take on that initiative. I've been a leader, I've managed people. As a manager, as a leader, I always appreciated people that took initiative. It might not be comfortable to do it, but by putting up your hand, especially when no one else is interested in doing it, you should really be jumping on those opportunities, because that leader is going to reflect well on you putting up your hand and actually taking the initiative. And sometimes it's not all about, say, your technical presentation or your specific job, your skill set. Sometimes it could be more on like some of the social committees side of things as well. Some organizations will have those social committees and they're looking for volunteers to help lead initiatives. That's always a good reflection as well. You want people to know your name, and being part of those types of initiatives certainly will help in that regard. Okay, forcing functions. So what is a forcing function? I kind of look at it as it's setting a goal or signing up for something with a fixed date, a fixed timeline, even though you may not want to do it or you may not know how to do it. But you kind of think that if you put in the work, you'll be able to do it. And in my mind, like, execution is everything. Many people have ideas, but if those ideas aren't actually implemented, they don't mean anything. They're useless. They're actually a waste of time in many regards. So in order to get an outcome, you need to be able to execute on that specific idea. So I like to look at this as creating situations that force me to get something done. So for example, you want to learn a new skill, domain, feature, then commit to building a presentation around it. I've done this many times in my career where I'd sign up for some sort of presentation, and it's like, I need to learn about A, B, C, D, and E in order to give that presentation. Well, I don't want to look like a fool, so I'm going to go learn and do what I need to do, and so that I can go ahead and present it. And it's one of those things where if I wouldn't have pushed myself, if I wouldn't have signed up to do that presentation, I wouldn't have had this forcing function to go ahead and get it done. But by not wanting to sort of let down the organizers, let down myself, I'll go and push myself to go do it. And it's the same thing with running. I do, a fair bit of running, more so earlier in life, but I still try to stay active. And I would do this all the time where it's like, you know what? I'm going to go sign up for that race, and then I'm going to do the training. Because if I don't have that race, then I know I can just hey, I'm just going to take today off. It's okay. I'll take tomorrow off too, no problem, right? But if I know that race day is going to be painful if I'm not in shape, then it will force me earlier on to do the practice runs to go execute upon that. And so I think that's a big thing, is create these situations and don't overdo it, right? You don't want to try to, hurt yourself in the process, but do challenge yourself these ways. You will find a way to get through it, and you'll be better for it. You'll now have those skills, and then you can kind of think about what's the next milestone, what's the next goal, and then think about how you want to force yourself into doing that. And we see this at work all of the time too, sometimes, where it's hey, we have these forcing functions that are going to force us to do stuff that we may not want to do, but we need to do it. So let's create this. So sometimes you do it artificially, and that's okay too. I think at the end of the day, it's all about execution. Investing. So this is where it takes a little bit of a turn, but I think it's important too. Like I do really wish I would have done this earlier in my career, like in my 20s. I'm not a financial advisor, but this is just some general guidance, and certainly talk to professionals about this. But I live in Canada, and we do have a tax sort of avoidance program or tax deferral program called TFSA. And the TFSA, that stands for Tax-Free Savings Account. We also have what's known as RRSP, and this is Registered Retirement Savings Plan itself. Now, growing up, I think these were newer programs as I was kind of entering the workforce, and the idea around them was kind of like, well, you should always sort of put money into RRSPs. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to sort of reduce your taxable income now, and then allows you to invest that money or save that money, and then pull it out down the road, assuming that you're going to have a lower income when you are retired. And so, like, on the surface, that sounds pretty darn good. And for some reason, it feels like more financial institutions push this over tax-free savings account. Now that I'm, older and I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, this is stupid. Like, I should have been maxing out my tax-free savings account first, earlier on in my career, then trying to get that pot to grow, and then pay zero tax on this stuff. Because you can, whatever sort of earnings or sort of growth you get from that is tax-free. Now, obviously in Canada, they'll limit how much you can invest per year to do that. But if you think about just the laws of compound interest, doing that earlier on in your career, maxing that out first, then worrying about RSP makes way more sense in my mind now. And so, when we think about how do we sort of get dividends and leverage compounding, we've got like DRIPs, dividend reinvesting. So if you're investing in a specific company and that company offers a dividend, they're going to give you a percentage based upon the number of shares you own on a specific time frame. Typically it's quarter, sometimes it could be monthly, sometimes it could be yearly. But they're going to basically give you a return for investing in that specific equity. And there's some good ones around ETFs, exchange traded funds, where it's more of a basket approach, and you'll get these dividends as well. And the idea is you can then take whatever sort of earnings you get for that period, a month or quarter, and reinvest it back into that same equity, and then allow it to grow. And the idea is like slowly over time, you're getting interest on top of your interest per se. And so I love the ones that pay you monthly, and I feel in some ways it reduces risk over investing in some equities directly, because I get paid monthly. Now, I could choose what I want to do with that. Like, I could take that money and go buy, high-tech equities if I wanted. I can put them back into, say, that ETF if I want. If I want to pull the money out myself, I could do that as well. And I think I'm not doing that, but my goal is, like, later on when I retire, be able to pull this stuff out and do it tax-free. But generally, like, look into your country, look for these programs, and take advantage of them as soon as you can. And I know, like, obviously everyone's in a different situation, but where you can afford to invest, take those opportunities, and the sooner you do it, the longer you have to benefit from it. Look up the laws of compound interest and really sort of take advantage of time that you might have and these programs, because taxes just seem to be getting worse and worse. And if there's things that you can do to help legally reduce your tax burden, then definitely take advantage of it. Passive income, and this ties a little bit into like what I just spoke about before, but not necessarily. The way I kind of look at it is, as I get older, having multiple streams of income just gives you more flexibility later on in your career. I think having all of your income eggs in one basket can create additional stress when there's economic downturns. And where you can take advantage of multiple income streams, I think you can sort of reduce some of that temperature, knowing that, like, if you did lose your job, you would have some other income that you could at least sort of lean on until you find sort of your next gig. And I think the challenge, generally people run into is that, like today with our typical jobs, we trade time for money. And obviously there's only so much time in the day. So how do you sort of get more with doing less? And that's what kind of the name of the game is try to find ways to scale. Or as what Grant Cardone would talk about is try to get your money to have babies. And I think that's where we talked about some of that, like investing in compound interest. That's an example of your money having babies. And as you can do that, that will continue to scale and scale. Now, in order to help sort of generate perhaps extra income to do that investing, maybe you do have a side hustle that you can actually take advantage of, especially earlier on in your career where perhaps maybe you have more time. And then once you have that capital, you can use the capital to drive passive income. Because if you're hustling and sort of doing these side hustles like creating training content, doing side projects for whether it's on like TaskRabbit or say friends for friends, things like that. Like that's an example of you trading your time for money as well. So you want to find ways to get passive income, and that can happen through investing in things like ETFs. If you have the opportunity to invest in real estate, that might create more passive income opportunities, or if there's other silent partner investments where you can go ahead and invest as well. And I know this might sound a little bit privileged to be talking about some of these things, but I think if you do some of the earlier on investing things, that small nest egg can actually become quite larger. And then I think what you want to do is just find opportunities to leverage that capital to help you scale so that you essentially can make some money while you sleep. And I think the goal here, it's not about being greedy, but I think it's just about being flexible. I think there's kind of nothing worse than having to do something because you have to do it, right? As opposed to maybe being more flexible in terms of what you want to do and making sure that you've got the income to support what that looks like. And I think for everyone that will be different, and that's totally cool. Next up, equity. Typically, like when we talk about working for a company, you get compensated, right? So the compensation could include your regular paycheck, some sort of benefits, could be health, dental, vacation. Maybe you get a performance bonus or profit sharing. Sometimes if you're lucky, you'll get like a signing bonus when you join a company. And then also we've got equity. And so what this could mean is RSUs, restricted share units, or stock options, something along those lines where you get kind of a piece of the company as you work for the company and do some good work. Now, not all organizations provide these benefits. And, that's not necessarily a knock on, organizations that don't. But I think my goal here is just to sort of give you exposure to this, because certainly when I joined the workforce, I didn't necessarily understand that all of these things could be available to me. And that's where it's kind of like, don't just chase the money because you're not going to be happy. But if you can find that sort of happy medium of a company that you enjoy working for, that compensates you well and provides you the ability to work with good coworkers, then you're starting to check off a lot of those boxes. And I think that's pretty important as well. I just find as I started to work for companies that offered equity, my overall income started to grow as a result. And it's just one of those things where, once again, it just provides you more flexibility, and I think that should be your goal itself. And naturally, there can be some risk involved with equity. We always hear the whole thing about startups and them going to zero. And there's also vesting periods, right? So generally, the longer you're with the company, the more you'll vest. And there's definitely like golden handcuffs where there might be periods where you sort of unlock so much, say, stock, per, say, quarter, things of that nature. So, it's not, say, a free lunch per se, but just thinking about opportunities where you might be able to take advantage of as many of these basically perks as possible could help you down the road in terms of your total compensation as well. So something just to be aware of there. 9, work-life balance. And so we've all heard the saying, no one on their deathbed says they wish they would have worked more. And I do think that's true. I think for me, I do struggle sometimes with work-life balance because in general, I would say that the harder I worked, the more opportunities emerged for me. But I think more recently, the last few years, I've been starting to get better about doing this. And I think one of the key things is spending time on the right things and, especially things that give me energy. I think that's important itself. And so you do need to understand what is valuable to you, what is say, valuable to your job, and then focus on those things first. Otherwise, defer. It'll be there in the morning. I've spent, my fair share of like late nights, working late into the morning, pulling all-nighters, and I think there's a time and place for that kind of stuff. And, before, it was almost like, well, I just want to get this done. But you start to set almost expectations of you doing that, and then the next thing is right around the corner, and you find yourself in a little bit of a trap itself. So do ruthlessly prioritize. Really think about what is important, what can wait, and things that can wait, let it wait. It'll be there in the morning. And I think the other thing is, I wish I would have done this earlier on in my career. I was always afraid to say no or afraid to push back. But I think the reality is if you don't set boundaries, no one else will. And so, like, if you can't work on a weekend, you say you can't because you've got these, other priorities. But, try to be flexible because it does become a two-way street. But do set boundaries, especially if someone doesn't have your best interests at stake and they're just trying to squeeze more out of you. That's absolutely the time to set boundaries because maybe it'll help them with their project. And it's one of those things where, what is it? Poor planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on mine. Think of it in kind of those terms. If you're dealing with one of those situations, set boundaries. If it's something where it's super important because like there's a big sort of push to get something out to market and the time is super sensitive and people will reflect and basically give you the proper recognition, then you want to be flexible with those situations. But the biggest thing is think about this, set boundaries, and really prioritize what's important. Lastly, a little bit related to it is, most things don't matter. I think at the time when you're really committed to a company and you're really pushing hard, you want the best outcome for, say, a project or a specific initiative, is that like think about the time horizon of what you're really sort of discussing or debating. Will this matter a year from now? Will it matter 5 years from now? Will it matter even 10 years from now? And then really sort of think, is this worth sort of dying on that hill, pardon the expression. But don't sweat the small stuff. Most things don't matter. I think the key is trying to figure out what really matters and then driving or diverting your energy there because that's going to provide the most impact to your career. And there's so many things I look back at as like stressing over or like really pushing. It gave me a lot of sort of anxiety back in the day, but it's like those things don't matter. I don't even care anymore. Like I could care less like what's going on with that specific situation. So kind of think about it that way. Generally not everything's permanent, and focus on the things that really do matter. So that's top 10. I know this has been a very different video than what I typically show on the channel. If this was helpful, go ahead, put it in the comments, questions, comments. If you disagree with me, that's cool too. And if you'd like to see more content like this, feel free to put that in the comments as well, and I'll do my best to help accommodate there. So thanks again, checking out my stuff, and we'll see you later.